Hello, class. It's me again, and I'm in a different room. I'm actually on the campus of Prairie State right now. I'm in my office using a different camera, different technology. Very exciting. Not sure if it works as well, but I'm going to, in this final video for this, looking back at week 6, I'm going to try to relate the myth of Prometheus and the suffering of Prometheus to the story of Odysseus and his struggle to get home, story of his homecoming, which is also the story of his suffering, of his pain. If you notice at the very beginning of the introduction that I asked you to read for last week and comment on by Sheila Murnahan, and she is a scholar of Homer. She's not the translator. Okay, so we're working from this book by Lombardo. If you notice at the very bottom, we have the reference to Sheila Murnahan, the introduction by Sheila Murnahan. So she didn't translate this book, but she's read it, and she's written extensively about the Odyssey, right? Scholarly work. She's a scholar. And if you notice, so the introduction is listed with Roman numeral numbers, okay? So it begins on Roman numeral 13, XIII, that's 13. No, it's actually, since I'm on this topic of the book, right, we have the cover, right, an image of the Earth from the moon, right? That was a big moment when we finally kind of saw how we looked from the point of view of the moon. But then we have the title page, and you know, the Lombardo, the translator, dedicates his translation of the Odyssey to Zen master Sung San, and a friend of his, okay, in memoriam. That's someone who died. And then we have the map. I love maps. I know I've been using lots of maps on the slideshows. Here's another map of Troy and Greece and all of the islands in between. Homeric geography. And then in the second half of the Odyssey, we'll be back on the island of Ithaca. And here is a map of the palace, you know, the hall of Odysseus's house on Ithaca. Just so you have a sense when that scene comes, right, when he's in the hall, the palace, or sorry, this is the whole palace of Odysseus, all the different rooms, excuse me. So when he gets back to Ithaca in book 13, he's going to travel ultimately to his own house, but in disguise. But we get a sense of all the different rooms and how they're related to each other, and also get a sense of how noble people lived in ancient Greece, right? This is how they built their houses, and this is how they structured the interior, right? Think about the relationship between, you know, different periods of architecture and how people live in their homes, how people design their homes, right? This is the ancient Greek home for a landed nobleman, for a king in this case. Notice at the bottom there's a reference to the dung heap, which is a part of the story. I think everything in here, not everything, but a lot of things in here are, you know, scenes from the story. Okay, and then there's a long introduction. And the first section talks about the tale of homecoming. The second section, right, in the theme of homecoming in the Odyssey. Then the second section, the metis of Odysseus. Like, look at the headings, right? That's useful. The metis of Odysseus. Okay, metis is a word for, in English, it would be translated as cunning. Okay, so the craftsmanship, the cunning, the skill, the intelligence, the versatility, the facility with words, right? These are all translations of metis. And so this section focuses on Odysseus's metis, which is a theme of the Odyssey, right? Not just Odysseus's metis, but he's a model, right? Human cunning, the cunning of the human. What is our cunning, right? Again, this is partly what Athena and Prometheus gave us, the gift of reason, the gift of understanding. Metis is a kind of gift from the gods, something of divine origin in some sense, right? It's in some of us more than others, but it's the, you know, this one form of cunning, of metis, we see in many different shapes and sizes in different human beings, right? And the model for it is Athena, or one of the gods. Okay, then the next section, I have trouble moving the book so you can see it, is called The Man of Pain. Okay, the Man of Pain. And that's what we've been talking about with respect to Prometheus. Okay, Prometheus becomes a god of pain in a way, right? He becomes the god who suffers for us. Right? That's his defining act, right? That defines him. Odysseus's name itself, Odysseus, as Murnaghan points out on page 26 of the introduction. His name actually has in it the word pain. So it comes from the verb odysomai. Odysseus comes from the Greek verb odysomai, which means to suffer pain. So Odysseus his name, right, itself means, you know, to suffer pain or sufferer of pain. But it also kind of has the connotation of one who causes pain. And Odysseus will be a causer of pain, right? He causes pain to Polyphemus when he blinds him. He is a warrior in the Trojan War, and he kills Trojan soldiers, right? He is capable of that kind of inflicting that kind of pain on another soldier, and he does that. But his journey home, right, involves lots of suffering of his own, but he also inflicts pain, you could say, on his crew. His whole crew will end up dying. He's the only one who gets home. His you know, his drive to return to Ithaca, right, ends up, in some sense, being the death of all of his, you know, leading to the death of all of his crew. I'm not saying he's responsible, right? He, in some sense, will, he makes it clear, Homer makes it clear at the opening of the poem who was responsible for the death of the suitors. Right? The opening lines in book 1 speak of all the cities he saw, Odysseus saw, the mines he grasped, the suffering deep in his heart at sea, right? The word suffering right there is in, you know, we are introduced to Odysseus as the one who suffers. As he struggled to survive and bring his men home, but he could not save them. Right? He tried to bring his men home. He could not save them, hard as he tried. The fools, destroyed by their own recklessness when they ate the oxen of Hyperion the sun, and that god snuffed out their day of return. So in book 12, you'll see that when they arrive on the island that has the cattle of the sun, right? Helios, Circe's father, we know from the beginning of Miller's novel, has these sacred cattle that he takes good care of. Turns out they're not immortal, but you know, he presents them as immortal cattle, but they belong to the sun, right? They are sacred cattle that belong to the sun, and you're not supposed to mess with them. They're his. Well, when Odysseus arrives on this island with his men, they're very hungry, and they have been warned not to eat the cattle, but they do. Right? And so it is their recklessness, their decision to eat the cattle of the sun, that results in their death, right? According to Homer's sort of mini version here, right? And this is how Odysseus will see it. But Odysseus pities his men, right? He thinks of them as reckless, but he also wanted to help them come home, right? That's one version of the story. Another version of the story is, you know, I don't know, Odysseus himself is, you know, does not take his men's interests into enough consideration, and he puts them at risk. And it's his drive for glory and to restore his honor that ends up destroying his men, right? There's different ways of reading it, right? Who is responsible for the death of his men? But notice the connection here also with Gilgamesh, right? There is a bull of heaven that Gilgamesh and Enkidu destroyed, and this has bad consequences, you could say, right? Or at least it's part of the explanation for why Enkidu must die. You know, he killed the bull of heaven. Well, here we have Odysseus's men eating the cattle of the sun, and for this, you know, this sort of seals their fate. They're not going to make it home, right? They didn't listen to the advice of Circe, the one who advises them not to eat from these cattle, right? And they also hear a prophecy from Tiresias in the underworld, right? When they travel to the underworld, Odysseus learns, you know, don't eat these cattle, right? Okay, but all right. Right away, we have a link to suffering. Odysseus is the one who suffers. And that section of Murnaghan's introduction, Man of Pain, right, draws draws some conclusions about Odysseus and his suffering and how he identifies with pain, both the suffering and the inflicting of pain on others. And of course, the whole poem opens with this question: why is Odysseus suffering so much? Why do you let him suffer, Zeus? Right? And Athena wants to sort of to put an end to his suffering. Okay, but we know that this is it's not that simple, right? Odysseus is, right, a man who suffers. This is what makes him what he is, right? Okay, so in book 5, when we meet him, notice he kind of identifies himself as the one who suffers. And so I'm gonna end here, right? So this is in book 5. After Hermes comes and tells Calypso to let Odysseus go, she gets very angry. Look at the scene where that's a great speech that Calypso gives to Hermes, right? Accusing the gods of being unjust. And it's here that she refers to Zeus on page 74 of your translation, line 135 in book 5. You said it, Hermes. Zeus has the aegis. I showed you an image of that. The shield that he wears, the symbol of his power. Zeus has the authority, right? And none of us gods can oppose his will. Okay, so here we have an expression of Zeus's power and authority, but Calypso resents it. And Calypso thinks it's unjust. She doesn't think it's fair, but but she's not going to fight this battle. She's going to let Odysseus go because she knows that to incur the wrath of Zeus in this case, ultimately it's not worth it for her. But so she agrees to help Odysseus find his way home, but reluctantly, and she doesn't hold back in her contempt for Hermes and her contempt for Zeus. Okay. So then she goes to Odysseus and speaks to him. And look what she says: "You poor man, you can stop grieving now." She sees him as the one who grieves, the one who's suffering and pining away. "I'm sending you home. Look, here's a bronze axe. Cut some timbers, make yourself a raft fitted with top decks, something that will get you across the sea's misty spaces." And she makes him an offer to help him get home. After this, she will also offer immortality. "Look, I'll help you to get home, or you can stay with me in this basically paradise of an island, and you can enjoy all of the comforts and pleasures that you want, and you will never die." Right? She offers him immortality, and he declines. That's interesting. Right? When we meet Odysseus, the first thing he is offered is the thing that Gilgamesh was seeking. And Odysseus says, "No, I would prefer the life of the mortal. I would prefer my life, going home, to my wife, to my family. That's what I want, even though it will bring me pain and suffering." He chooses pain and suffering, and he identifies as the one who suffers. So his initial response to Calypso's offer to help him come home is not like, "Oh, thank you, thank you." Not one of trust, but one of distrust, suspicion. "I don't know what kind of send-off you have in mind," he says on page 75, line 173. These are the first words that Odysseus is speaking, right? This is our first encounter with Odysseus. "Goddess, telling me to cross all that open sea on a raft? Painful, hard sailing, right? That's nothing but pain is in front of me, right? I'm not going to fall for your trick. Some well-rigged vessels never make it across with a stiff wind from Zeus. You're not going to catch me setting foot on any raft unless you agree to swear a solemn oath that you're not planning some new trouble for me." Right? This is the cunning of Odysseus. He knows that I'm not going to give you anything unless I get something in return. So if you want me to cooperate with your plan, you have to promise me that you're not going to mess with me and cause me more pain, cause me more suffering. Right? Right away we see Odysseus like he sees himself as kind of a victim, right? As a victim of the gods, and as a man who suffers. But also he sees himself as someone who can negotiate himself out of any problem. And so, and who he doesn't give anything unless he gets something in return. So she agrees to make an oath, right, to promise not to harm him. And so he agrees to go with her. But once he gets out at sea, Poseidon comes and destroys his vessel. And so look at how Odysseus describes himself at sea, right? After Zeus kind of brings this storm and destroys his vessel. Right? This is how Odysseus sees himself, kind of as a man who suffers, as a man of pain. And that is a theme that you can track throughout the text. And we'll come back to that theme in class. Okay, I've run out of time. Hope this was interesting. Okay, bye.